Okay, good morning. Hemshech Beis, volume 2, top of page 1197. This is the last discourse, 144 in this volume 2 of Ayin Beis. Okay. So we've been discussing really a very avoidic and personal application of the ideas discussed about the yearning and the longing of Malchus, of Eish Hey, Isha, toward Eish Yud, Ish, in this case God, the neshama yearning to cleave to and connect with godliness, the intensity of its thirst and of its longing and of its yearning, to the point that it's called chelas ava. It's not just a longing, it's an aching. Literally somebody that is lovesick, that his entire being is consumed with it and affected by it, and it feels the lack. When someone is in love and that love is not being fulfilled, that would be the example for it. As we learned yesterday, chelasava, like it says, chalu pnei kale, chalu na, from the word chelu, cheli rather, and vayechal Moshe. That Moshe wasn't just impacted, but as the Medrash says, the Gemara says, shachzu cheli shalatzomis, that a illness penetrated, basically held him in his clutches, an illness in his bones. And the Rebbe Rashab explained, how do we reach that level? That's through, he called it his bonanus ba'aflos erein sof baruch hu, a contemplation in the wonder, in the grandeur. Remember, we learned about the haflah. In other words, not as the divine relates to existence, but the wonder, the divine that is beyond it all. How seva mamalo seva klamen, how God fills and transcends existence. Ve'ech she'atzmu serein sof baruch hu is completely not begeder mamala and begeder seva, not in the realm of those forces. And everything is nullified before him. So when he says, when there's an arichas is bonanus, a prolonged contemplation, and ba'amokas hadas, with very concerted and focused, concentrated das, where you're internalizing it and personalizing it in a profound way, that causes the intense thirst to be encompassed in this higher reality. You want to be part of it when you realize that all that you're aware of is nullified and is like nothing compared to the true, the emes, the ultimate truth of Atzmus. So that's what it causes the mili b'shamayim v'imcha lechafatz tibaretz. That you want only him, only that essence. But then the Rebbe Rashab said and went further, and just be aware, this is going to go a few pages, this avodah. At least 1, 2, 3 pages, at least, probably more. Maybe 4 or 5 pages. So he's going to go into a long discussion about this work to be done to reach this level of chelas ava. So now he goes and says furthermore, that the longing, there are many levels of longing. This is through contemplation. But then he introduces now Riyah, envisioning. When you envision and have a certain Riyah nelikus, which means it's not just an idea, but you actually, it's something that you see, that creates a much deeper longing and a much deeper chelas ava. So just to read again what we learned, I'll just read again. Omnam ikir inyan chelas ava, the primary element of love sickness, that aching love in seeking a connection to that which you are with your beloved, comes through Riya Belakus. Now, what does Riya mean? It doesn't mean you see. It means an envisioning, something that you relate to Riya. He's going to explain this more. The idea Riya Nasa Chuki Yeseda Benefesh. When a person can see something that they love, then it becomes even more compelling and more difficult for them to resist. And more importantly, not so much difficult to resist, they're more aching because it's so real to them. He's going to explain the difference between his bonus and Riya shortly. And we learned that the eyes of a person, when you set your eyes on something, but that will not satisfy you. So seeing something is like a double-edged sword in a way. On one hand, you're closer to it. On the other hand, will not sate you, will not satisfy you, will not fulfill you. Like he says, the b'masharei be'enav ena mazbia. To put on a very physical level, if you're very hungry and you see the food, but you don't eat it, it'll make you even hungrier. It'll make you even more. What's the word I want to use? Even more driven and drawn to it. So if you're hungry and you don't see the food in front of you, okay. But when you see it, the seeing alone just makes the longing stronger. Because seeing alone does not satisfy you, will not fulfill your need. And will not quench your thirst. Because in truth, seeing something does not fulfill you, it just makes it more compelling. And now he's going to explain the difference. So what's the difference between when you contemplate on something that is so powerful and that causes you to long for it, and when you actually have ability to see it, but obviously you're not but unable to internalize it. So he says like this: now, something that comes in the state of awareness and comprehension, going back to his bonus, that your mind is contemplating on it. Like any divine contemplation, shemasig, that he understands, v'nirgash b'nafshe ma'oid, and he deeply feels in his spirit, ha'ilui v'ayeked elikus, the quality and the value and the preciousness of godliness. And I'm just going to give a small example. When a child is playing, let's say, with a toy and is enjoying himself, for a child, a little toy is good enough. An adult is not going to be enjoying that, playing with that toy, because the toy is meaningless. You grow a little older and you realize toys are nice, but for children, we look for more sophisticated toys. Let's say reading a book, acquiring knowledge, traveling. Okay. As we grow and mature, our interests should be expanding, then to a point where you come to realize, that's not just about making money or other physical pleasures. You come to realize that the true and the best type of fulfillment is something spiritual. Spiritual aspirations, values. Why am I here? Now, when you put all these people together in one room, they're all having pleasure. But all the pleasure, the pleasure is the same, but the object of the desire is different. So for the little child, the toy is good enough because that's his scope. For a little older, you need something a little more sophisticated. And for a person who comes to realize that everything in this material world is temporary, and the only thing that lasts and enduring, like Avram Avinu came to realize that everything in this world, including the sun and the moon, they're all physical entities. And he began to appreciate that there's the divine that is eternal, transcendent, and so on. So you fall in love with it. Because compared to everything else, or rather everything compared to that, is meaningless. So just find an example in your life where something that was once meaningful, you grew and matured, you realize, you know what? I can live without it. Or I have it, but it's not The all, the what is it? The all and all of everything. What's the expression? I forgot the expression.
Beat all, end all.
Be all, right. The be all. You realize, you know what? It's nice, but there are bigger things. You know, a lot of people have a wake-up call like that in their lives. Sometimes, unfortunately, it comes through loss or crisis, where you suddenly realize, you know what? God's blessed me with a beautiful family. Why am I complaining? In other words, basically, I want to give just a very balabatish, very practical examples of learning to fall in love with deeper values and higher values. Now, obviously, he's talking here about a lukus, that the ultimate is you come to realize through masig, the value and the quality and the preciousness of godliness. Now, of course, the Rebbe Rashab is relying that we know what elikus means. That's what, but to make it clear, I wanted to explain it. Now, there could be many other explanations. But the point is, you come to realize that there's pettiness. You know, many of us have been petty about certain things. And then at some point, you come to an epiphany, a realization. 1 second. It's narishkeit. It's nonsense. Everything I've been fighting about, or everything I've been consumed with is nonsense. Now, usually that comes when you realize that there are bigger things to be concerned about. Now, the ultimate is obviously elikus. Okay, a lot more can be said. I just wanted to make it a little more mamoshistic, a little more concrete. But this is still all coming through a contemplation, and you feel it strongly. It's not like it's an abstract idea. You do relate to it. Now he goes on. V'tav, again he used v'tav. U'mishtekik ela kitev. So what happens? This contemplation and this feeling of the ilay and yoker of elikus, the quality and the value, the beauty, the preciousness, and then v'tav, and he hungers, u'mishtekik, and yearns, longs. You know, I've been looking for pines. Seek. I mean, if you have a better word, great. Mishtekik is very strong. Shukah. Ela er ketev, to the air that is so good. Talking about the air eliki. So what happens then? He says, "Harihu merave mekol mokim tzimene bezeh hagili sheba bahasoga." Bahasoga. So he says, to some extent, he quenches his thirst. In other words, that though he has this thirst, this hunger, this yearning, to some extent, he nevertheless quenches the thirst. How? Bezeh hagili. 1 second. That the fact that he's able to understand it and contemplate it, some of it is quenched due to the fact that he's appreciating it.
Not only understanding.
By understanding, because by understanding the idea, that alone causes him, brings him satisfaction, because it radiates in him.
Shine.
1 second. Let me finish the sentence. 1 second. The Ayin eliki, the divine idea, and that very gili of him appreciating this idea, to some extent, quenches his thirst. So simply put, that when you contemplate on something you truly come to appreciate, and the value, the contemplation does something. It doesn't just cause you to be lovesick and ache for it. There's that element, but the fact that you can appreciate it and understand it and feel it is somewhat also a resolution. It's giving you some satisfaction that you're appreciating it. It's like when learning Chassidus, you start learning about elikus, different levels. So though, yes, there's much more to grow, but the learning of it is gishmak. You're starting to appreciate. So though it's something that is beyond us, and we seek and we long for, but the very understanding does something. You can't say that just you remain only wanting. There is something that it does for you. you feel a certain pleasure from it. You'll soon see in a moment how he contrasts it with Riyah. Okay? Good. Mashenken b'Riyah. However, if you can actually see it, or at least envision it, Mashahu Riyah Elakus, Eina Meravet Semein. When he's able, with the fact that he's seeing the divine, and we'll soon explain what that means, seeing. What does seeing mean? Isn't seeing just another level of contemplating? But clearly he's talking about a higher level of appreciating it as if you're seeing it. He says this does not quench his thirst. Mishum inyan. In no way does it quench his thirst. And the reason for that is because when you see something, you're seeing the actual thing. You're not just imagining and conceptualizing something. You're seeing the actual thing. That does not manifest in a way that you can completely grasp. Okay, this needs good explanation here. So let me, but if you allow me, I would like to read more, even though it's not fully understood what he means yet, because I think this is going to be understood as we read more part of this. Okay? So just let's hold up for a moment. What is he really saying here? We know the pshat, what he's saying, but what is the meaning behind it? So first of all, what is the difference between contemplating and seeing? So when it comes to a steak, I gave the example of a physical object. You know, you can imagine about eating a very good juicy steak, if steak is your thing, or find whatever other juicy food, but then somebody puts it on the table, but they don't give it to you. They only let you see it. And you see it before your eyes. So what he's saying here is that the seeing is going to create more longing and not less satisfaction. Whereas if you only heard about it, you heard that there's going to be a meal like that, that has some element of satisfaction. At least you can contemplate about it. He's saying that, in other words, the closer it comes to your experience, the more the longing and the more less fulfilled you may be. But now, what does he mean by seeing the etzem hadover that's not the tfisa? So generally, Chassidus says that about Riyah versus Shmiyah. If I tell you a story, if I describe to you a painting I saw, a beautiful one, because you didn't see it, in a way you'll appreciate it in a certain way more. What do I mean? Not appreciate the power of seeing something, because you'll be able to focus on the details. When you see something, essentially it's more overwhelming because you don't really, the samtus is there. It's very resonating, but you cannot say that I really contain it. Because in a sense, it's more like it's larger than you are. So Shemiach Chassidus explains, you go step by step. Someone's describing it to you. Okay, I understand. I hear. But when you see something, there's something about it that's overwhelming. It's not tfisa mamish. Now, I'm avoiding really going to deeper explanation because I really want to see where he's going with this. But basically, we just keep in mind right now, before we continue, as we continue reading, that he's talking about two different ways of experiencing something. One, where you experience it and there's some quenching of the thirst. It's not completely leaving you frustrated. And the other leaves you more wanting. So basically, when you see something, it becomes something that really makes you feel that inadequate or longing because you don't have it. If you don't see it, it's not as bad, so to speak, in that way. But he did say more than that. It's not just not the longing isn't as much. It's also your thirst gets quenched somewhat through the very contemplation, which also needs explanation. But I'm happy if somebody wants to weigh in, because I'm telling you right now, it's clear that we need to read further to understand it. But if somebody has a thought, even though I always say don't process yet, let's absorb first. So I would encourage we just read, but just in case somebody does want to say something, I know, it's a little frustrating when we don't fully understand what he's saying here. But again, I encourage us to just read on, but I am happy if somebody wants to comment. Okay, that was not an ultimatum. That was just my own feelings on the matter. So let's see what he says, and we'll go back. Obviously, we're not going to leave this hanging. We're going to have to go back and fully understand what he's saying here. But he's clearly discussing quite high levels of chelas ava, which makes it even more difficult for us because we're not really accustomed to feeling such aches for godliness. So I guess that doesn't help understand it well. But let's see what we can figure out here, okay? Good. So he says like this, Ubenefesh, so right. In other words, you see it, but you can't hold on to it. Whereas, exactly, when you see something, it's definitely visible and recognizable, but you can't own it because you're not holding it. You're just seeing it. Okay. Ubenefesh, hu be'emek hanefesh b'yeser. This level of riyah in the nefesh is a very increasingly deep level within the nefesh. B'madrega kazu, b'nefesh she'ena mismala u'misrave. It's touching a very deep level that in this level of the nefesh does not get fulfilled and quenched. And then he adds in Yiddish, was benugen sich nit. In other words, benugen sich nit means doesn't satisfy. It's not enough. Seeing is not enough, basically. Bishum gili, in any form of gili. Like before he said again, b'shum inyan. Now he says b'shum gili. That it does not in any way get fulfilled or quenched. Wow.
He's describing Riyah here.
Yeah, he's describing Riyah, and he's describing an experience that is, I mean, I have some thoughts. I'm really resisting explaining it. Let's read more. Let's read on. As I said, we're going to go back, but I'd rather read it and then go back. Okay. Ukamay shekosov, eretz le'sova mayim. The land that's parched to the point that le'sova mayim, that there's not enough water to satisfy it. Like, in other words, think of a drought, and the water is a complete desert. As much water as you give it, it will never satisfy it because it's so dry and so empty, so arid and dry and parched that there's no amount of water that can fill it. The harotze v'hatiyuv, this yearning, this longing and hunger, the etzem hanefesh of the etzem hanefesh, because remember he said the emek hanefesh. The etzem hanefesh lo sova mayim klal does not get satisfied at all. The eina meravet simene le'elam, and you can never quench its thirst. Wow. Well, right now it sounds like he's talking about a fundamental core thirst at the core soul that is never satisfied, no matter what you give it.
By Riyah doesn't satisfy.
Yeah. This is Riyah. In other words, if I said to you, let's learn Torah and do mitzvahs and dance on Simchas Torah, etc. So there's a certain satisfaction in that. You're learning, you're understanding, but that's not etzem hanefesh. That's clearly what he's saying here. That's on the level of hasaga, hargosha, your understanding, your feeling. It's the concept. But when you get to the core essence, basically you're never fulfilled. Now, what that means exactly, it needs explanation, as I said, but at least that's what he's saying right now. So I'm continuing learning Pshat right now without explanation. And it's very bekitzer. That's the thing here also. The Rebbe Rashab is not elaborating. He's just making statements. He's not explaining it really.
Yeah, one is not satisfied by seeing a beautiful thing or a beautiful woman or a beautiful dinner. You have to really get totally involved.
I mean, you know, I will go on the limb. I'll say the following. Let's talk about a relationship between human beings. And I think that's where he's going here. Obviously, he's talking about Elikus, but I want to just give an example with human beings. Yeah, I will say this. I think it's important to qualify one key qualification. For us, the idea of thirst and hunger does not elicit positive feelings. You know, who wants to be thirsty and hungry? You want to be fulfilled. Why should you want to be thirsty? But what he's saying here, I believe, is that in the Etzem HaNefesh, being thirsty is actually a good thing. Because you're recognizing the Ein Sof of Elikus. In other words, it's our limited perception and our limited experiences that look at things in terms of, you know what? I feel empty. Let me get myself fulfilled. But when you get to the core level of things, that's not how things are measured. Being in a state of constant shukah, a constant yearning, is actually a quality, not a liability. So the closer you get to the etzem of the inyan, actually the more thirsty you become. So in a relationship, let's say between spouses, husband and wife, have a good relationship. We know the relationship is on many levels. It's on a very basic level, on survival level. You like each other's company, you eat meals together, you build a family together, you do things together, you take care, you educate your children, you educate yourselves. I mean, all the levels. But when you get into deeper dimensions of a relationship, and I don't just mean intimacy and sexuality, I mean the deepest connection, it includes that. When you go there, your vulnerabilities, first of all, are much more exposed. And there, it's not on the terms, oh, you know what, I get my needs filled, let's plan this. There, it's like two soulmates, plagufa, two halves of a soul, connecting to a place that's not about fulfillment. It's about connecting to something greater than you are. So the idea there is not about ownership. It's not like, maybe ownership is not the right word, but it's not like we control things. You're actually surrendering on that level to something that's beyond you, which in other words is a form of a deep thirst and longing. So on one side, yes, you say, 1 second, but I want to be fulfilled. But on the other side, that longing is part of experiencing the infinite. You know, when you're experiencing the finite, you can more or less acquire it and somewhat be fulfilled. But when you're experiencing the infinite, the God that's beyond everything, there longing becomes a very critical component in that experience, which is very, I would say many of us would be very, what's the word I want to use? Like disillusioned by that, which means that, in other words, the end of the destination, we're going to end up in a state of longing. I want to succeed. I want to feel like I own it. But in a way, when we say, for example, that tzaddikim or talmidei chacham ein lehem menucha, lo ba'olam hazeh v'lo ba'olam haba, they have no peace, not in this world and not in the world to come. Is that something we're looking forward to not have peace? And then we say, Yom Shekulei Shabbos u'menucha l'chai elamed, that Mashiach comes, the 7th millennium will be like Shabbos, permanent menucha. Is it ein lehem menucha or is it menucha? So the Marsha, others explain, the Rebbe brings this as well, that there's two different ways of heder menucha. You can have a lack of peace and serenity due to anxiety, where you're troubled and you're anxious and very, in a sense, a weak state. But there's another ein lehem menucha that has nothing to do with anxiety. It has to do with always longing more because you want to be connected to God. And you realize it's an infinite journey. So it's not and inla menucha in the negative sense. It's basically be menucha l'chayalam, being at peace, that you will always be restless and longing for more. That's not the anxiety that we go to therapy for or that debilitates us. That's an angst that actually motivates us. Because when you see Ein Sof, you always want more of it. I believe that's something that it's touching upon. Now, I'm not absolutely certain, because you still have to understand, does the thirst ever get quenched? Because the point of Chelasava that he's been saying is fine. There's a Chelasava, but it's still Chela. Don't we want to heal from that? Remember, we're talking about refuah. So we still need to see what happens next. Does that mean that this thirst gets quenched, or it means that being thirsty is a good thing? I would assume that he's going to lead us to saying no, that this love sickness that's coming from this profound underappreciation of Asmos ultimately has been quenched, but maybe every time it's quenched, you come to discover there's more to long for. That speculation. I'm not sure if that's what he's going to say. I just wanted to...
Right.
Huh?
Sound right what you're saying.
Yeah, but you know what? We're going to learn inside. And as I always tell you, I'm telling myself as well, I don't want to jump the gun here and come to a conclusion. I'm just throwing it out because I'm bursting at the seams to understand where he's going here. So I broke my own rules, but I hope you forgive me.
Would you be
And
able
we'll
to
see.
say
It's
in,
like
in
what-
one sentence, what is the difference between the Hasoge and the Re'iyah?
Well, the Hasog is definitely, you only have heard about it. And Riyah means in some way you're seeing it. You're
Hasoge
like,
is not, no, Hasoge is not you here. Hasoge is you are recognizing that takes you through and through. He said, Toev u'mishtoikek, but Re'iyah looks at something more than that.
as I said, yeah, Riyah
Yeah, we're having
means,
a saga about Rhea right now. Anyway, Rhea is like, it's like, Rhea is like, I mean, Rhea and fulfillment, it's ultimately like,
I mean, the only place I see it,
Shuv.
the only place I see it when the Rebbe cried for the Geula, it was an unquenchable thirst. He refused to give in. You know, nothing could satisfy him until you have the actual Geula. The Rebbe Sichos, the Hashanah Rabbi Sichos, the other Sichos we talked about. That's where you see this type of, like he says, an earth that's so parched, no matter what you give, you can't quench the thirst of the Etzem HaNefesh. Anyway, that's what he said so far. Let's read on. I don't have answers to all the questions yet. We'll talk about Riyah and Asaga. First of all, in Ayin Beis itself, earlier, he spoke quite a length. Bina is Asaga, Chachma is Riyah, just for the record. So remember, Riyah is resonance. Riyah is, what were the words he used? Riyas ein hasechel, Riyas hasechel. Riyah is a deep recognition as if you see it with your own eyes. Hasaga, as much as you understand, it's not something you could say. For example, ein eid nasa dayan. As much as the aid understands what happened, but because, as much as the dayan understands what happened, as long as he didn't see it, he could still be objective. But as soon as he sees it, he's an aid, he can't be a dayan. So hasaga does not mean you don't understand it, doesn't mean you don't appreciate it.
It's a good example. It's a good example.
Yeah. It's not my example. The Chassidus brings the example. But yeah, Kiven de Chazinu, that's the Gemara. Once he saw it, he cannot see it, it affects him. So that's like I don't want to use this example, but I remember I was once a Shabbaton with Chaim Potak. And Friday night he spoke, and he said that as much as people encouraged him to go to Yechidus to see the Rebbe, he didn't want to. Because he felt if he was with the Rebbe, saw the Rebbe in personal Yechidus, it would affect his objectivity. So
he thought that he is objective.
Yeah, Kavyachal. 1 second, listen to this. And so he decided he'll come to Fabrengen. Well, it's not quite personal like that. Okay. The next day I spoke and I asked, oh, no, that night, I raised my hand And I asked Mr. Potak, I said, if God invited you to come up on Mount Sinai, would you also not go because you'd lose your objectivity? You know? So his wife started yelling at me, whatever. It was fine. And I later in my talk, I said, with all respect, I did see the Rebbe and and I still have a Yetzer Hara. I respect the fact that you felt if you saw the Rebbe, you'd lose your free will. I can tell you, I saw the Rebbe and I didn't lose my free will. My point is that there is an element sometimes when you see something that you cannot no longer deny it. Whereas as long as you heard about it or you understand it, it's still one step away.
He said, "Hori'iyah hu be'etzem hadovo."
Yeah.
שאינו בו בבחינת תפיס הממש, ובנפש הוא בעומק הנפש ביוסו.
Yeah. It means by pashtus that once you're in that level, it's the etzem of it makes you feel that you can't control it. You don't own it anymore. As long as you understand it, it's easier for you to be able to contain it to some extent. That's what he's saying. Anyway, let's read on. Let's read. There's nothing wrong with reading, and we could always read again. Remember, this isn't a one-time effort. It's not like you have only one chance to read this. Very often when you learn a mimer, I'm just sharing methodology here, you learn it once, and then you go back and read it a second time, a third time, you have to read it 10 times, 100 times. So sometimes that's what you do, and I think that's what we'll continue doing now. And we'll go back. We'll try to understand it to the best of our ability. Okay. The parentheses is just going to make more complication, but I have to read it. Okay. So here comes a parentheses, which is probably going to make more confusion here but let's see what he says. V'yesh lemer. So far we've established that in this level, eres le'sova mayim, that the thirst is unquenchable. Okay. V'yesh lemer. It's a chiddush from the Rebbe Rashabi. One can say, because here seems to be an apparent question. We know la'asid love, it says there'll be riya samahus, not just hasoga samahus. Well, actually, v'nigla k'vayd Hashem, v'ro kol bosher yagdav, that we will actually see and experience the essence of godliness. Kulam yedu esi, but more than yedu, riya. V'ro kol bosher, riya samahus. Ayin ba'ayin yiro. In the Alter Rebbe in Perek Lamed Vav, in chapter 36 of Tanya, brings a bunch of psukim where he says riya, and me'ein zeh was by Matan Torah. They saw something. They didn't just hear about it. They didn't just understand it. So he says that fact that when the Asid Lavi in the future there's going to be riya samahus, the year b'bchinas Shuv, and it's not going to be an eifin of rotze. We just said that riya causes rotze, that you long for it. L'asad love, we say there'll be riya and it'll be contained. In other words, it'll be internalized, not rotze. So he says these words. Yezeh b'derech pella. Yeshem dezeh shalosh yibchinas samuz yibchinas shuv. Yezeh b'derech pella. That tak is going to be a very wondrous thing. That's not as easy. In other words, yes, it's true. It's not what we're saying. He says that's tak going to be a pella. It's going to be a wonder that such a thing is possible.
Because you have a re'iyah, how could it be shuv?
That's what he says. That's the pella that he's saying. Look, I'm telling you, this is a very profound piece, and I really strongly want to read the whole thing, and we'll understand it better. But he's saying clearly, there'll be riya and not rutz, it'll be shuv. Not like we just said. So it's that taka will be pella. 1 second, he didn't finish. The yesh lemer, and one can say, another yesh lemer. Shezeu inyan vani el chemes eish. Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, Prozes Teshu Yerushalayim, yeah. Okay, I'll explain in a moment. That this is the inyan that I will be for it, that there no longer will be walls of stone, but Ani, the Eibishter says, I will be a wall around Yerushalayim, a wall of fire. So now Yerushalayim is surrounded by a wall of stones. So no longer will be Chemes Avonim, it will be Chemes Eish. One second, I'll explain more. Let me just finish reading the parentheses. Sharish Eish Yeh B'chines Shuv. Wow. That the flames of fire, the fiery flame, will be not in the form of tzemoyin, of aliyah, longing, it'll be internalized. It'll be like a chayma. I'm going to explain in a moment. And elsewhere he explains the difference if the hergish is in the heart or in the mind. Okay. You probably don't have a clue.
Fascinating.
Huh? Yeah. You probably don't have a clue what this parenthesis is saying, so let me explain. I know this not from the reading this because I learned it in other places in my Morim. And the Rebbe actually speaks about it. So we know there is a thing called the Ir Mukefes Chema, right? That there are cities that are surrounded by wall and it has halachas. For example, Shushan Purim. And there are other laws about Mukefes Chema from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. But that's the technical part. What is the significance of a walled city? Why is it different than an unwalled city? In the Beruchanius. So the explanation is like this. It's essentially Ratzeh and Shuv. Cities that are very powerful cities, like Shalayim, Sfas. Even in Lu'umazeh, Shushan was the capital of Persia. So why do you build a wall around cities like this? Because they're the capital. That's where the king is. That's where the leadership is. So you need more protection. You need protection against enemies. That's what the wall is about. It's also like we talk about Beis Hamikdash. It's covered Hamikdash when you surround it. It shows respect. When it's prozes, when it's open, fine. But something that you really respect, you surround with guards, so to speak. So basically two things. It's protection and also a sign of covet. Like anything, when you have a valuable item, you don't just leave it around. You put it in a box, in a display, you protect it, and you also honor it. They say, a Sefer Torah, you put it into an Aron Kodesh, you don't just leave it hanging around. So the wall essentially is a type of balance, or you can say protection and an honor of the value of what's inside the wall. Okay. In the language of Chassidus, the city itself is a state of rotzeh. What's rotzeh? A very deep connection to godliness. But in order to be contained and not just expire, kleis hanefesh, you need a wall to contain it. You need boundaries. You need a structure to make sure that it's not like Nadav and Avihu, where the neshama just expired, and that was it. So the wall is a way of grounding and limiting and so-called containing the energy within. The greater the energy, the more the wall that's needed. Okay. Now it says, the Pasuk says, Prozes Teshuv Yerushalayim, that Mashiach comes and the Asad Lave, Yerushalayim will be Prozes, where the walls will no longer be there. Why? Because you don't need walls anymore. First of all, you don't need to protect.
It will expand. It will extend Yerushalayim.
Yeah. But the Eibishter does say, I didn't say there won't be walls. I will now become the wall. Ani Ela Chemes Eish. So we'll still have a wall, but it won't no longer be a wall of stone or a wall that's like a physical. It'll be the fire of God. Chemes Eish, the fire, which is also a form of Rotzeh. It will be the thing that contains the Riyah of Elikus, Il Asad Lave. So first he says it's a pella, it's a capella, to have these two opposites. On one hand, Riyah Samahus and Shuv. But then he says This is the idea, that there will be a Shuv, but the Shuv itself will be in a form of Rotze, in a form of fire. That's what he says here. Usually, fire is Rotze, right? Fire goes up. But here, God will, so to speak, it will be like the Eir HaBligvul will be contained by the Eir HaGvul. Put it in other terms. Today, it's not Eir HaGvul, it's a Koyach HaGvul. It's real Kalim, it's walls. It's a wall. La'osad Lave, since godliness, godly energy can be Bligvul, but the Bligvul will be in a form of Eir HaGvul, based on everything we've been learning. So essentially, the Rotze will be like a Shuv. That's what he's saying. I know.
The law will call Boso. That the Boso will have the law.
Yeah. Okay. This is a very quite mind-blowing idea, because it's like, so what do we learn from this? But so how does this contrast with today? Before the parentheses, he said, Ria causes Simoyim, Rotze. Now he says, La'osad Lave, the Ria can be contained because the Rotze itself becomes a form of Shuv, which basically in different language would be, Koyach HaAtzmus allows you to have Ria and Shuv. But right now, in a state of Chelas Ava, when you have Ria, it only causes Rotze. But he's already answering essentially that when the Asalavi comes, it will be quenched because the Rotze itself will become a Shuv. That in other words, the wall will be there, but it won't be a wall of matter. It'll be a wall of fire. So the fire itself, which is always a Rotze, it itself will be a Shuv, which is basically the level that's higher than Seva v'Mamala, unites Seva v'Mamala, unites Rotze and Shuv, and unites Bligvul and Gvul. That's how I would explain this parentheses.
Reb Simon, the Sicha from Parsha Shmini in Chelek Yudayin, the Rabbi is explaining it very deep and clear.
How does he explain it? Do you remember?
The Rabbi is explaining that there are two ways how Hashem could do it. One way he could do it because he could do everything, b'derech chidush. But he said that's not the way it's going to be. It's going to be that the world itself, naturally, and because the Halem is created for that purpose. It's very, very beautiful. This is basically what the Rabbi Rashab is saying here. Famous age is Shuv.
Okay. Well, did everyone understand my explanation, or do you need more explanation?
I need more explanation on it because especially since it seems like even if it's a homos age, that's impenetrable. What is it?
Impenetrable. Yeah,
it's impermeable. You can't go through that. It's like you don't live there. You can't live within that wall of fire. So in a sense, it's still not. You would think that if it contains both of them, you would be able to do Ratzov and Shuv at the same time. Whereas a fiery wall is still impenetrable. So you would not be able to do it at the same time. It seems. I mean, I assume I'm living within Yerushalayim, not within the wall itself. So I still have a limit to my Shuv and Ratzoi. It doesn't seem like it's united there in that way.
Well, the reason Ratzeh and Shuv are opposites is because when you're in a state of longing, like let's say Nadav and Avihu, they were in a state of ecstasy, and when you're in that state, it's very difficult or impossible almost to ground yourself. The stories with the Alter Rebbe and Rabbi Avram HaMalach, the Maggid's son, they were learning, and the Alter Rebbe recognized that they were both their souls were going to expire. Rabbi Avram HaMalach was already almost expired. And the Alter Rebbe had the presence of mind to give him a bagel and sometimes it says a bagel, sometimes a bagel and butter. So it's basically to ground him. Like we know when the Rebbeim would say a Mayim Chassidus, they would hold a handkerchief. They tie it around their hand, which was in a sense a grounding. When the Nevi'im said Nevuah, the pasuk says they held on to a keli or something basically to ground, because they were in a state of ecstasy. The Navi sometimes went into a state of a trance. And they needed something to keep it grounded and also to make the nevuah be tangible, should be ultimately realized. The Rebbe often, when he gave mashke, mezenis, he would bring that from the Drosha Saran, that the reason they held on to something was to make the nevuah come be concrete. So generally, these are two opposite tenuas. You can't have them both at the same time. You could say, okay, I have a rotzeh. That's what Chassidus says. And then you have to have a shuv. You have a very strong yearning for something, longing, good, but you can't completely be consumed by that. And then you need to go and bring it, ground it. The constant process of rotzeh and shuv. Those that couldn't maintain that balance, so in the case of Nadav Aviyah, they expired. They were consumed by the fire. The three, except Rabbi Akiva, went into the Pardes. They were affected. One died, one went mad, one became an apostate. So they had a very big rotzeh, but they could not contain it. Rabbi Akiva, for reasons I'll explain in a moment, was able to do both. The nichnas b'shalom, the yotze b'shalom. But even there, the rotzeh and shuv are not one level. There's two levels, they just are balanced. So someone has their head in the clouds, but they have their feet also firmly planted on the ground. Just to give an example, when Binyamin Kletzker, Alter Rebbe's chassid, was making his cheshbenis, his accounting, his calculations. So the story goes, he's writing Tishrei income expenses, cheshbon income expenses. He wrote it all out. Then came to the Tarsach Hakel, the total. He wrote Eneid Milvade. Nothing but God. That's the total of it all. So the Rebbe asks a question. If he's so consumed with Eneid Milvade, how did he have the presence of mind to write Tishrei should have written equals Eneid Milvade, Cheshbon Eneid Milvade? There's only God. God is everywhere, not just in the Sachakel, in Tishrei too. So the Rebbe smiled and said, if he would have done that, he's not a businessman. Then he should go learn and learn Chassidus all day. The Chiddush is that he is in the world of business. And Masa Matan Ba'amuna. He has to be accountable and honest in his cheshbon. He can't just come and tell his vendors and his clients, hey, Eneid Mulvade, running a business in Tachtenim. But when it comes to the sum total of it all, he knows what the kavanah. So in other words, it's constantly a rotzeh and a shuv, and you have to be able to balance the two. So that is essentially Yerushalayim and the wall around it. The wall is the containment, and the Yerushalayim is the Yerushalayim, the rotzeh. But you need the balance. Okay. Now, La'asid Love, we know the world is not going to be destroyed. So the structures of existence will not cease to be. At the same time, they'll be completely permeated with Elikus. Something that initially doesn't make sense because they're contradiction. How could you have a dira b'tachtenim? Tachtenim is defined by tachtenim. Tachtenim means the lowest of worlds, the most concealed divine, structures, very finite structures. Dira and Leila Atzmuse, Dira Lo Yizbarach, is completely Bligvul and beyond Bligvul. So how can Bligvul and Gvul come together? So the answer is because, as we learned, true Atzmus is not Bligvul nor Gvul. He's able to join them together. The problem is we can't join them together because we are limited creatures. However, through the Aveda of refining and transforming the Tzimtzum, to use the language of these Mamorim here, initially, Tzimtzum and Gilui are opposites. Yes, the purpose of the Tzimtzum is to ultimately reveal. But when a student begins to learn Aleph Beis, it has to be contained. If the teacher starts flowing, the whole Bligvul we learned, existence couldn't exist. So you have to have a Tzimtzum, and the Tzimtzum is opposite of Gilui. But then, as we grow, the student grows, you begin to get acclimated, and you start learning about the purpose of the Tzimtzum and the real kavanah of Gilui, to the point where you can come through the thousands of years of Avodah that we did through history, where the Gvul and Bli Gvul both come to realize Atzmus that's beyond both of them. In other words, the Gvul refines itself by revealing the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the godliness within existence. As we climb the ladder, as we learned, you start appreciating, like you said here, Aizbananus, that godliness is beyond Mamala Kalaman, the godliness that's beyond Gvul, the godliness that is pure godliness that just reflects, and its purpose is to reflect what God is. And then you come that God is neither Bli Gvul nor Gvul. Remember, we learned that the Ein Sof of is Ein Sof. The Ein Sof of Atzmus is Shlilas HaKel, Shlilas HaGvul, Shlilas HaBli Gvul, Shlilas HaShlila, Shlilas HaChiyuv, Shlilas HaShlila. But now we appreciate it because the student has studied it. It's not just someone told you, Kol Yachol, God can do it. And we've refined the physical world. We have transformed the Tzimtzum. Once you transform the Tzimtzum, now you start seeing how Tzimtzum and Oyer come together. Because the Tzimtzum is just another form of Havaya or Elikim. Havaya is the real essence of Elikim. And you see how they join together. So therefore, La'asid Lava, you'll have both things. You'll have structure, but it'll be the structure itself will be made of fire, not of walls. It will be made of fire, of divine fire. And the Ratzeh and Shuv don't have to be two separate stages. Why? As long as you are your identity, so you're either in a state of Ratzeh or a state of Shuv. Either I'm longing or I'm quenching. Either I'm thirsty or I'm quenching my thirst. I can't do both. But when you can experience Atzmus, Atzmus is both. You can be thirsty and quenched at the same time, and at the same time feel there's more. I know it sounds like a contradiction, but when La'asid Lavi, remember, comes after years of Aveda, of recognizing that concealment really is just another form of revelation. So the walls of Yerushalayim are just another form of revelation, but revelation in the form, like we said, the infinite possibilities of God are manifesting now in a form of a wall. But it's not a true wall in the sense of limitation. That's why it's called made of fire. So therefore you can have Rishpei Eish, which is Ratzeh, but it's in a state of Shuv. And you could be in the same position where you can be thirsty and quenched at the same time. This is what he's saying. This is how I understand it. It's a very obviously profound concept. You could only appreciate it, however, once you go through the stages. There's no way you can jump to this if you didn't feel thirst and then quench the thirst and keep growing until the point where you can be both places at once. You can be in the presence of Elokus Mamish, feel fulfilled, but also feel empty. And remember, because it's not about your tzir, it's the bittul. Rabbi Akiva had that bittul. Now, Rabbi Akiva was still nichnas b'shalom v'yotz b'shalom. It was two stages. But the other three did not have the bittul. Their bittul was only through the rotzeh. They didn't have the ability to shed even their pleasure and ecstasy. They were feeling too, and Rabbi Akiva was able to have the balance, the presence to be able to contain both. So that's a brief way of how I would explain this. Now, so I hope that helps. Any further question on that, or was it clear now? I hope there's. Are you all in the state of Rotze here? What's going on?
Pele.
Huh?
State of Pele.
Okay. That's like
You know,
Rotze.
Sometimes that feeling of Ratzo V'Shuv can be experienced. Sometimes I experience it, I think a little of it, in learning Chassidus, meaning that sometimes when the mimer just blows me away and I get answers and understandings that I never had before in my life, it's like such fulfillment. Like, oh, I understand something new. But at the same time, you're so excited, you want to hear more. So
okay, that's a legitimate expression of it. Yeah. Remember, as soon as you get yourself out of the way, your ego and your identity, you can experience opposites all the time. The problem is that we are defined creatures and we like to categorize, I'm doing this now. like that. We are structured in that way. But when you do get yourself out of the way, you let go, you could have both elements. Yeah.
You cannot really have both elements until Osid Lavoy.
That's for sure. In a sustainable way, yeah. And Eliezer was just giving an example, a personal example, just as a taste of it, obviously. Yeah, in a Chanami.
The Alter Rebbe, the story that you mentioned before, could be that was the pain of loss and Lavoy. Was the ear.
Well, they still, well, you know what, loss and love, you probably don't need bagel and butter. Okay, look, let's all absorb this, digest it. I'm not suggesting it's, and let me just finish with the last line in the parentheses, which I want to look up, because he adds, that there's a difference in this matter if the feeling is in the heart or in the mind. So I'm not sure what he means. Does he mean that in the heart, the Rotze and Shuv cannot come?
Not the Shuv. That the Shuv is also in the heart. Then you have the Re'iyah. In Re'iyah, how could it be Shuv in the heart? Or maybe the Shuv is in Mayach. I don't know. That's a possibility.
No. I think what he's saying, that the difference is, he's saying Hefresh. That a Hefresh behu. Sheesh Hefresh b'zeh im ha'hergish. That the difference would be that in the heart, maybe the Rotze and Shuv cannot come together, and maybe in the Mayach it can. Anyway, I want to look it up because I'm not positive what he's saying. But what the Hefresh
even today, I don't think so.
Well, first of all, he's talking about loss of love. So I'm not, I'm not sure. Even loss of love, I would say. 1 second. Shuv. Yeah, because in the Moyach, you can see it more coming together. But you have to understand what Moyach means, what lev is. Because what's the Hergish b'Moyach, Hergish b'Lev? I'm not sure what this last line means. I need to look it up. Anyway, let's just conclude here. After the parentheses, now he goes, Valkain, hu b'chinas cheles ava. Because he's seeing it and he doesn't have it, the longing creates that aching love, that love sickness. Now, we're going to stop here, but now he's going to continue further discussing how you come to this state. So that's what I said. And I also recognize sometimes the Rebbe Rashab, and I'm not, obviously, God forbid, analyzing the Rebbe Rashab's methods, but sometimes you see in his Maimorim that the ideas flow in a very orderly way. Sometimes you see the ideas begin to develop as you go along, which is usually the case when the Rebbe Rashab as he was writing, the ideas were flowing. And sometimes he had already formulated all the ideas before he wrote. It sounds to me here, and I've seen it already a few times, I pointed it out, where the ideas continue to mount and you don't really get the picture till you finish it. That's what it looks like. Because now he's going to go into discuss how do you get to this place of Riyas HaMahus? I'm sorry, not Riyas HaMahus. He's going to go now into the contemplation that leads to such a Riyah. That's what it sounds like to me. But we'll stop here. There's always tomorrow. But if anybody wants to ask anything before we conclude here, I'm happy to listen. It's pretty heavy. That's what I can tell you. Very heavy stuff. And if I'm correct, so that also fits into the whole explanation with Tzimtzum, Eira Gvul, Eira Bli Gvul. Yeah, I think so. In other words, if you exposed each of us to Eira Bli Gvul prematurely, before we're ready, it would just annihilate us. When you start with Gvul, Eira Gvul, and then you grow to Eira Bli Gvul, then you can begin to contain it. The example I often give for this is, I'm presenting it, hopefully in a tzniyazdika way, in a subtle way, that children cannot have intimacy. Not that they can't physically have intimacy, but they don't have the kalim for it. It'll completely overwhelm them. An adult is a capacity, because it's an energy that's beyond. So intimacy, even though it's not a technical thing, it's like introducing a certain bligvul into life experience. And you have to have channels for it and containers. But once you acclimate, you can receive that. Then you join the two together, and then you can get to the third level that's beyond bligvul and gvul. Okay, just talking to myself here, but fine. Anybody want to weigh in? Okay. So we stop here, middle of page 1197. And whereas it was still a good middle of it, so more to go. And I feel an element of thirst now and understanding and quenched a bit, but it's like a good combination. So